Since the earliest civilizations, people have turned to music as a form of expression. And in Iran, this tradition is as ancient as the Persian Empire. Instruments like the santur have been played for thousands of years, through war, conquest, reunification, and revolution. And they continue to be played today. What role has music served throughout the history of the Iranian people? And how does it continue to shape modern social movements? I'm Stella Saleh, and I founded the Iran Music Project to examine Iranian society and culture through the lens of music. Join me as we explore the history and impact of Iranian music and how Iranians are using music to express their protests today. Persian mythology credits Jamshid with the invention of music. Jamshid was the fourth and greatest of the mythical kings, and his reign propelled Persia into a golden age. The instruments played in ancient Persia are some of the ones that are still played today. The stringed tar and setar, the percussive daf and tonbak, As an American citizen, travel to Iran is not possible at this time. So I did the next best thing by traveling to another ancient land in search of answers. In Cairo, I met Egyptologist Khaled Ezzat, who told me my answers are to be found at the Temple of Karnak.
All ground staff requested to leave the aircraft for departure, please.
Luxor, Egypt, once ancient Thebes, is a treasure trove of pharaonic history. It is home to temples like Karnak, as well as the Valley of the Kings. Its music echoes millennia of ritual chants and folk melodies that continue to inspire performers along the Nile today. I'm here in Luxor, Egypt, at the Temple of Karnak, where I'm about to interview Egyptologist Khaled Ezzat. Do you see any similarities between Persian music and poetry and Egyptian music and poetry?
For sure, there is a link for sure between Egyptian and Persian music, for sure, as a road, or as, for example, if we take the musical instruments as the ancient Egyptian, it's almost similar between the Persian and between the ancient Egyptian. For example, if you see like one of the musical instrument which is very popular, which is the harp, you're gonna see it on the Persian and the Persian-like society till nowadays. As well, in one of the also other musical instruments that the Persians that they used to have, where you call it like, we call it tambura, which is a 3 strings, and you used to play, like there is, like always I say, there is a link between the different civilizations, and if they are trading with each other, traveling from one spot, because the human himself, like he liked to travel, he liked to explore. So that's why you could see the matching, for example, in the musical instruments. In another hand, like where you could say that in the ancient time, music, it used to be more like showing the mood of the person. For example, you could see, for example, on the ancient time, the festivals which is used to be held on the temple. You could see like the dancing, the way of dancing, where you could see the acting like this way and dancing and bending on the back. It's the same acting on the ancient Egyptian. For example, we'll take this figure as a scene where you see it here. You could see how they are raising their hands and how they are like feeling the happiness of the music.
As I walked through the ancient Khan Khalili Bazaar back in Cairo, Khalid's words echoed through my mind. Ancient Persian culture must have shared some similarities. Armed with knowledge, I applied it to what I know about an important period in history before the Arab invasion, a period when Iran was united under the Sasanian or Sassanid Empire, in which music flourished. During this time, Persian music would take on a new structure whose influence is still felt today. The Sasanian Empire existed from 224 to 651 CE. Zoroastrianism was the state religion, and the Sasanian Empire was the last pre-Islamic empire of Persia. The Sasanians regarded music as cosmically ordered, with connections to Zoroastrian spirituality and astrological harmony. This spiritual aspect continues to be felt in classical Persian music today, especially in the Radif system, where each mode represents different states of emotion and consciousness. But there was one musician from this time whose influence would impact generations to come. Meet Barbad. Barbad was a pioneer of Iranian music. A court musician from the Sasanian Empire, Barbad is credited with inventing a system of 7 modes, 30 derivative modes, and 360 melodies. This corresponds with the amount of days in a week, month, and year according to the Sasanian calendar. Barbad's inventiveness earned him a godlike reputation in Persian society. Barbad's system may be seen as a precursor to the dastgah system that Persian classical music uses to this day. Music was an integral part of Iranian social life up until the Arab invasion in the 7th century CE. The invasion brought the religion of Islam as well as great change to Iran. During this period, around 643 to 750 CE, music was banned for its irreligiosity. Music was deemed un-Islamic for its potential to arouse or instigate intense emotion in its listeners. It wasn't until after 750 that music was reintroduced under the Abbasid dynasty, allowing for a powerful exchange of musical ideas between Iranian and Arab culture. The next leg of my journey took me to Los Angeles, home to the largest Persian community outside of Iran, a community that took root in the late 1970s.
How old are you? 16. Okay. Thank you, Stella.
After the 1979 Iranian Revolution, thousands of Iranians, many of them from educated middle and upper-class backgrounds, fled political unrest and religious persecution. Drawn by LA's climate, economic opportunity, and cultural openness, they settled mostly in Westwood, an area now known as Tehrangeles. Over time, the community flourished, creating a vibrant hub of Persian-owned businesses, media, cuisine, and art. Today, Iranians in LA maintain a strong cultural identity while contributing to the city's diversity, from entertainment and tech to politics and academia, making it the undeniable heart of the global Persian diaspora. There, I met retired dentist and Persian scholar, Dr. Samuel Dayan.
موسیقی شاد و ما اون نوازنده های فوق‌العاده داشتیم. پایه های موزیک قبل از اسلام بود که خیلی هم مورد قبول دربار و مردم بود. بعد از حمله اعراب موزیک ایران به چند دلیل عوض شد. یکی تحت تاثیر موسیقی عرب قرار گرفت. دوما از این وقتی که این همه بدبختی کشته کشتار به خانواده های ایرانی اومد، اون موسیقی شادی که قبل از دوره اسلام بود عوض شد. چرا؟ چون هر وقت مردم وضع اقتصادیشون به هم میخوره، هر وقت که تشویش و دغدغه نون دارن، گرسنه هستن، موسیقی یه موسیقی دیگه به دلشون میچسبه. موسیقی شاد برای اینا بی‌معنی میشه. اینه که موسیقی ایران در یه جهتی افتاد که برای تسکین مردم باشه، مردم دوست داشته باشن. مردم ناتوانن، مردم فقیرن، مردم هر
موزیکو فرق میکنه.
اینا یه موزیکی میخوان که غماشون رو تسکین بده. اینه که موسیقی ایران به کلی عوض شد. سامانی ها خواستن یک تغییراتی بدن که بعد از اسلام اونایی که پادشاهان ایران دوست بودن و میخواستن زبان فارسی ها رواج بدن، که نتیجهش البته اومدن فردوسی بود که زبان ایرانی ها زنده نگه داشت. فردوسی شد یه سنگری که ایرانی ها پشت این سنگر از زبان فارسی و ادبیات فارسی دفاع کردن، نذاشتن که زبان ایران عربی بشه.
Ferdowsi was considered one of Persia's greatest poets. He wrote the epic masterpiece, the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, which describes the mythical and historical origins of Iran through over 55,000 rhyming couplets.
یه موقعی هیکل یه روزنامه‌نگار بزرگ مصری، روزنامه الاهرام رو داشت، ازش پرسیدن که خب شما یه تمدن دیگه داشتید، زبون دیگه داشتید، شما 5000 سال تمدن داشتید، چطور شد زبونتون عوض شد؟ گفت برای اینکه ما فردوسی رو نداشتیم.
Dr. Dayan mentioned Ferdowsi's significance to the preservation of the Persian language, and I left curious to learn more about the connection between Persian music and poetry. Next, I interviewed Persian poetry scholar Ahmad Sigari, whose particular expertise is in the vast literature of Hafiz, another titan of Persian poetry.
Hafiz's poetry just like music. It has music and poetry, they're hand in hand.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And if you don't have poetry, your music is just music to listen. But if you have put words into it, then you enjoy it, right? اوکی، بگه اون بیت اول میگه که در این زمانه رفیقی که خالی از خلل است، صراحی می ناب و سفینه ازل است. ببین یه چیز خیلی رایم داره، بعضش خیلی بیشتر رایم داره از این که الان جلو منه. چون من اینو گراب کردم رو میزم بود، داشتم روش کار میکردم، گفتم اینو میزم. ولی بعضش واقعا از اشعار حافظ پر از موسیقیه، ولی کلماتی که انتخاب کرده و این معنی ها رو توش گذاشته و آورده، اینا این کلمات جوری به هم وصل شدن که یه حالت ریدم دارن و یه نوع موسیقی رو تقریبا چیز میکنن، ادوکیت میکنن.
و این زبون حافظ از زبون فارسی امروز چجوری فرق میکنه؟
هیچ فرق نداره.
هیچ فرقی نداره.
ولی مردم تشخیص دادند که یک شاعرایی مثل حافظ که بازم داریم، سعدی هم تا حدودی و شاعرای خیلی عراقی، خیلی شاعرای دیگه هم داریم که اینها مردم رو راهنمایی کردن. درست راهنمایی نه به طور مستقیم، به طور رندانه. توی متن، زیر متن شعراشون شما میتونید پیدا بکنید. مردم ها راهنمایی کردن، به مردم گفتن خوب میشه، دوران خوب میشه. واقعا من که خب ارادتمند حافظ هستم و واقعا خودم یه شن کوچیکی از قبلش میدونم، میفهم هر وقت میخونم که این چقدر با مردم بوده، چقدر به مردم درس امیدواری داده، چقدر مردم ها درست رفتار کرده که مواظب ملاها باشید، مواظب زاهدا باشید، دروغ میگن بهتون. اینا اون چیزایی که میگن با اون کاری که میکنن دوتاست.
After a great interview, I decided it was time for lunch. So what better place than an Iranian restaurant? I just got a delicious meal at this restaurant and wanted to share the different components. Here is my favorite, the salad shirazi, which is a delicious combination of chopped cucumbers and tomatoes, onions, with some lemon juice, which is the key ingredient, and some pepper sprinkled on top. Very fresh and refreshing for this warm day. Here I have my kebab kubide, which is the centerpiece of Iranian cuisine. And it is with a bed of nice buttered rice.
The historically rich culture of music and poetry that Dr. Dayan was explaining would bring to bear in the 19th century a new framework for improvisation in Persian music. It is known as the radif and is used to this day. The radif is the repertoire for Persian classical music, and the word radif means row or sequence in Farsi. The radif is a collection of melodies called gushe that have been passed down orally through generations. The gushe, or melodies, of the radif are grouped by dastgah. A dastgah is a mode, or a specific iteration of a scale. Each mode, or dastgah, has a unique mood or emotion associated with it, and so the gushe are grouped by the dastgah they pertain to. Mastering the radif is the goal of every Persian classical musician. The radif is taught by ostads, or professors, and an ostad may have their own version of the repertoire that is unique. The radif was formally established during the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century. The Qajars ruled Iran during a time of increasing contact with the West. The radif was partially developed in response to this Western influence. For generations, Iranians had been passing down their melodies orally, but creating the radif allowed for an organized system in which Iranian melodies could be preserved and transmitted more easily.
موسیقی که برای اون به وجود اومد که الان ما میگیم موسیقی سنتی ایران، به واسطه شرایط اقتصادی بود که مردم داشتن بعد از حمله عراق و البته همینطور رواج داشت تا اخیراً در اواخر دوره قاجاریه و مخصوصاً بعد از اون ما موسیقیدان‌های خیلی بزرگی اومدن، خیلی از موسیقی‌های قدیم رو ثبت کردن، نوت نوشتن، نوت نویسی. سبا اومد علمی کرد موسیقی ایران را، نوت ها تمام دستگاه های موسیقی ایرانی روش نوت نوشت، پایدار شد و یه بیس علمی برای موسیقی سنتی به وجود اومد که خب رشدش هم خوب بود.
The radif would continue to develop beyond the Qajar dynasty and into the Pahlavi dynasty of the 20th century. Reza Pahlavi led a coup of the Qajar dynasty to establish a new monarchy, the last monarchy of Iran. The Pahlavi dynasty saw both the development of classical music and the rise of Persian pop. For the first time, classical music was taught formally in conservatories. Teachers published the radif in Western music notation, making it more accessible, but signifying a break from the oral tradition. Another significant contribution to the classical music world was the Golha program. This was a series of radio broadcasts on national Iranian radio that started in the 1950s and ended when the revolution happened. Each Golha episode featured classical Persian music and poetry and played a key role in promoting these traditional arts.
بهترینش که بخوایم بگیم مثال بزنیم برنامه‌های گلها بود که در دوره شاه موسیقی با شعر تلفیق شد. یک کامبینیشن بسیار قشنگ بود، موسیقی و شعر. شعرهای خیلی قشنگ ها میخوندند و خب مردم هم خیلی دیدشون فرق کرد به موسیقی سنتی.
It was now the 1960s, and Iran was growing rapidly in cities. New Western entertainment gained popularity in urban scenes, and musicians began to blend radif melodies with danceable beats. Western instruments like the electric guitar, saxophone, and drum kit were played alongside traditional ones. And new pop stars rose to prominence. Ebi, Vigen, and the unparalleled Gugush quickly became cultural icons. This Western influence continued into the 1970s and could be seen in multiple aspects of Iranian life: in fashion, cinema, and education. Women's rights were improving nationwide. In 1963, they gained the right to vote, and by the 70s, more women were educated and working than ever before. This modernization was centered in urban areas, however, and traditional customs were still very much a central part of rural Iranian life. The Empress of Iran, Farah Pahlavi, took it upon herself to explore all regions of the country to discover the intricacies of Iranian culture. As the Empress, she recognized the importance of preserving this culture and used her influence to promote traditional Iranian artisans. I had the great honor of speaking with the Empress to hear her perspective on Iranian art and music during the time before the revolution. You look amazing. Hazari?
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Well, music for me has always been very important. From childhood I liked music, and I'm happy that my mother sent me to learn piano. And music for me was very important. And speaking of music, I will want to talk about the Festival of Art of Shiraz, because we had an organization that was libraries for children, and we had thousands of libraries for children. And then the head of that organization had organized a festival of people who made film for children. And then when I went to visit that, there were some musicians who said that we wish we had also a festival of music. And I thought that's a great idea. And Mr. Qutbi was the head of a television, and he was taking care of things. And I asked him, I said, why don't we create a festival of art in Iran, and a festival which will be, we call the dialogue of East and West, to make East and West coming together. And then he said it's a good idea, and there were 2 or 3 other persons. We spoke about that, and we were wondering where to do it. We said in Iran there are some opera houses and theaters, and Isfahan is not the place. We thought of Shiraz, because there are some very old houses, and there are the 2 famous tomb of Hafez and Sadi of Shiraz. And then also during the summer there was a Aramir University there, and there were houses and rooms for students. We said that the rooms are empty, and then the young people can go there without paying. So we decided to do the Festival of Art in Shiraz. The handicraft was important in Iran, and encouraging them and helping them politically or materially because in different parts of Iran they had different handicraft, and after a few years, all the dresses I was wearing was with Persian tissues, and and I encouraged people to do that, and we had beautiful embroidery that some people continued. In Balochistan, for instance, they had beautiful embroidery, was more red, yellow, and black. Iranians are artists, really, in many fields. In our time, I was very happy that, of course, there were Iranian ladies who were always, many years ago, even before me, were fighting for their rights, for the position. But what we call the White Revolution that His Majesty has made in Iran, it was really to give, because those who could not vote or get elected were the military people and those who were mentally had problems, and women. And then when what we call the White Revolution happened, in that time women had the right to be elected and to vote. And I remember we had what we called, the government had made army of development, army of health, and part of them were young people. Instead of going into military service, they were serving in the villages in remote areas. And I remember once I went to to Shiraz, and I was having lunch with the students, and the girls said, "Why don't we go to that also? Only boys." And I said that to His Majesty, and then also girls went into those groups of development, going to villages, to different areas to help people. So really, Iranian women were active and working in many fields.
The year 1979 brought revolution to Iran. It meant not only a change of government, but a complete change in lifestyle for millions of Iranians. Muslim clergy replaced the Shah and the monarchy, and they instated Islamic law. Iranians fled the country, settling all over the world. The Iranians who stayed would experience a complete reversal of the modernization the Shah had worked so hard to foster. Women were required to wear the hijab. Punishments like flogging and stoning were reintroduced, and music was highly restricted. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, spearheaded this purge by publicly condemning music. He said, "Music is like a drug. Whoever acquires the habit can no longer devote himself to important activities. We must completely eliminate it." The government banned women from singing and banned Western music entirely. The great stars like Gugush left the country in hopes of continuing their passion and profession in the diaspora community. After a time, the state began using music as a propaganda tool. This was an especially vital tool during the Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980. Propaganda music included revolutionary anthems called Sorud, as well as traditional religious chants. Pleasure music was essentially eradicated from Iranian life. But the ruling of a new religious government wouldn't be strong enough to stop Iranians from continuing practicing their ancient tradition of music. It was time to go underground. It started out small. Little house parties where friends could listen to band tapes. Secret home studios where groups could make recordings. And before long, a new business was born. Much like the inadvertent effects of prohibition in the US, the banning of Western media only fostered a new obsession for all things Western. A black market was born through the trading and smuggling of illegal tapes or recopied movies. It was in this shady and thrilling scene that the artist Arash Sobhani came of age. Arash Sobhani is an Iranian rock and roll musician currently living in the US. He recognizes the power of music to foment social change and strives to create music that is personal and impactful. Arash was a leader of a popular group called Kiosk for many years. I had the honor of meeting Arash online, and he recounted his early struggles creating music underground.
It's a long story how I became interested in music. Actually, I was at a time, growing up in Iran after the revolution. There were a bunch of cassettes left from, my uncles and whoever was our, people we looked up to, and they had left Iran, and we always thought they were the coolest. So I started listening to those cassettes and trying to get a feel of what they were going through when they were listening to those songs. And those songs were Pink Floyd, Supertramp, Eagles, those guys, standard 70s and 80s and some disco and stuff like that. So I was very lucky that my introduction to music came with bands that my uncles used to listen to, and they were, I think, good quality music. It was not just, cheesy pop stuff, but nothing wrong with that. But I just got interested into lyrics because I remember my uncle coming home and listening to Hotel California and just saying, you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. And this was like, wow, they actually said that. So lyrics became very important to me. When I went back to Iran when I was 16, we started this underground music band, me and a bunch of guys. And back then there was no computers, so it was analog recording. And we were like 16, 17 when we decided we were all very much into Pink Floyd and concept albums and things like that. So we decided to record and write our own music in English, and our English was, very bad. So we came up with the story of this guy going to war. Back then it was Iran-Iraq war, was still going on. So it was the story of this kid who gets brainwashed into going to the war, and then he dies, and his spirit comes back to haunt the people who brainwashed him to go and lose his life. We started writing it in Farsi with my music buddies, and we thought, it was around the time the war was over, and they wanted to kind of like do some cosmetic reforms because the younger generation was coming about, and there was a lot of us, and the war was over, and they couldn't just keep pressure on the people. So they started giving some sort of permits so you can have concerts or you can record, because before that, even carrying your electric guitar would get you in trouble. I got in trouble just carrying my electric guitar, and police stopped me. And what is that you're carrying? It was like you're a criminal or something. But after they wanted to open up this the atmosphere, we created this band called Raza Shab, which I started writing lyrics in Farsi back then. But then I started realizing, okay, now getting the permit is not as easy as it seems. You have to go to the ministry. You have to submit your lyrics. They read it without listening to the music. They just read the lyrics, and then they come and say, oh, this word and this word and this word we don't like. And it would be stupid words, like anything that they thought it was intriguing, like red. The color red is something that they think it's violent. Or so you would end up, you can't talk about your love because, having a relationship with the opposite sex was forbidden. You can't talk about anything. You can't nag about anything. Everything is perfect. You can't complain. So what you're left with is just enjoying the view. What a beautiful sky! The clouds are beautiful. That's all you could talk about. So it was really stupid for me to continue doing that. We did a couple of concerts. We actually released an album, but after that experience of getting the censorship and everything, I decided to just write whatever I feel like talking about and record it anyway. And I realized really early on that if I want to play something that to be seen on let's say, limited stages that you're allowed to play electric guitar or be in the, like let's say back then the TV had a ensemble that you could join and play music for them for the soundtrack or whatever. So that was what a lot of musicians went to, and they made a living off of playing for the TV. But then you had to play whatever they told you, and that wasn't what I wanted. So that's I decided, okay, I'm not going to do this. We're going to do underground. So from our first album that we did analog in a bedroom, live recording of a bunch of 16 years old, you can imagine how terrible it sounded, but it had the soul and it had the message. I realized that I never would want to do it any other way. and I was still playing guitar with my music buddies, and we had this underground, like a basement thing that we used to play at, and we called it the kiosk, because kiosk is a Persian word that means that any temporary structure that you can hang out in, like newspaper stand and stuff like that, are called kiosk.
میگن اینجا گیتار نمیشازه میگن اینجا گیتار نمیشازه
And because the setup was always temporary, we had to move the basement from our place to somebody else's place, depending on whose parents were away, so we can set up our music stuff. So kiosk became our thing. It became our like temple.
میگن اینجا باس نزن با دختر مردم لاس نزن میگن اینجا باس نمیشازه.
Restrictions loosened on music following the death of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989. The next leaders reintroduced classical music and public performance, but with strict guidelines. The turn of the century welcomed with it a new reformist president in Iran, Mohammad Khatami. Pop music was allowed, as long as it was approved for its moral content. But Khatami's policies clashed with conservative leaders, and he was soon replaced by hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who brought with him a new wave of censorship. It was now the early 2000s, and the underground music scene was retaliating using the tools of a new century. Thanks to the internet, artists could unofficially share music easily with a large population. New software helped aid the underground production process. Aside from technological advances, the early 2000s was a period of cultural advancement as well. Rap had emerged as a dominant music genre in the West. It wasn't long before a young underground musician named Soroush Lashkari discovered it, before taking on the stage name the country would come to know him by, Hichkas, or No One. Hichkas is the father of Persian rap. He was one of the first successful Iranian rap artists and began releasing his music underground in the early 2000s. His first album, called Asphalt Jungle, was a work of social critique that blended slang and poetic allusion to create a piece that was relatable, unique, and thoroughly Iranian. My research into the emergence of Iranian rap and the popularization of underground music led me to find Professor Nahid Siamdoust at the University of Texas at Austin. She is a professor of Middle Eastern Studies, Languages, and Cultures, and is one of the leading experts analyzing Iranian culture through the lens of music.
You know, when I was in Iran as a child in the 1980s, there really wasn't underground music. There was an underground trade in music, both from, pre-revolutionary music and music coming in, slowly trickling in as of, I would say the mid 80s from LA, or a little before the mid 80s from LA, but there really wasn't an underground music scene in Iran itself. But then when I was sort of in my last year of high school, I returned to Iran because I really wanted to get to know this place that I hadn't seen in, 7 or 8 years by then. And and I noticed that on television, you now all of a sudden had these crooners who on Islamic Republic television would sing, and there was some kind of music, no instruments were shown. But it was a stark difference to my, first decade in Iran, where there was no music to be seen anywhere because music had been at first banned and then eventually permitted, but there was so much taboo around music. There certainly wasn't music in the public space. And so this really kind of, became seared in my mind that, wow, there's now music on television. And so it's really in that decade of the 2000s. So I went to Iran in 2002. In that decade of the 2000s, that underground music started really, flourishing in Tehran. And I became aware of it through both rap music, which was, popping up here and there on my radar and on the CDs that people would sell on the streets, as well as rock music of the type that you mentioned, like Kiosk, for example, or 127 was another band that was, pretty prominent in the underground music scene. But there was one sort of organization called Tehran Avenue that ran this underground music contest. And I believe their first contest was in 2004, if I'm not wrong, or 2005. And so all of a sudden, when they put this call out there for underground musicians to submit their work for this contest, you really saw, wow, this is not just like 2 or 3 bands that are out there. There's something like 30 or 40 bands who are able to send in a track for consideration in the contest. And they were of all kinds of musical genres. The decade of the 2000s was really what the sort of blossoming of underground music in Iran. Iranians don't have a whole lot at their disposal except for their bodies, which we saw in the course of Women Life Freedom, the use of social media, and the arts. And those are the resources they have. And that's why those are the 3 most important sites of analysis when we look at Iran. It's the arts, it's social media, and it's the way in which people, but especially women, utilize their bodies to push for change. Music is extremely powerful because people can really relate through music, and people can relate to music and through music. And music is able to bring together complete strangers and unite them into being a public together. That is the power of music, right? Through lyrics, through a simple tune, all of a sudden, hundreds, thousands of people can really unite over a certain sentiment, and without really saying a word, understand where their unity lies, right? How they're sort of coalescing around that, feeling or sentiment, whatever it is.
Professor Siamdoust's words drew my attention to the not-so-distant past, where music played a large role in spreading awareness in Iran regarding an issue. It was 2022 when Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish Iranian woman, died at the hands of the Iranian police. Her crime was not wearing her hijab correctly. The 22-year-old's death ignited a freedom and feminist movement in Iran. Women took off their headscarves in public, supported by men, as they marched through the streets in protest.
I think the way the movement is continuing and the way it started has been through women's bodies. It was ignited by the murder of one woman's body, Mahsa Jina Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish woman who was visiting from Saqqez, who was visiting Tehran from Saqqez in Iranian Kurdistan. And since then has been channeled through women's bodies. This we see in the art, but also very much sort of physically on the streets. And so, it looks like it's fizzled out because we don't see too many political expressions of it. But then when you look at Iran today, which is, nearly, 2.5 years later at this point, right? Nearly 2.5, not quite, at least 2 years later. The realities on the ground have drastically changed. You now have, large areas within urban centers where women are not covering up anymore. And this movement was never about just taking off the headscarf, right? This was an egalitarian movement for freedom and liberation, and it was intersectional. It really spoke to the oppression to all kinds of oppressions, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic, generational, right? The fact that in Iran, a majority of the people who are oppressed happen to be women and the youth, and because it is their freedoms that are restricted to a great extent. And so that's why we saw the majority of those fighting for this movement were women and youth, although men had equally their part. And so, they have created this fact on the ground, which is that they have taken greater freedoms for themselves within public spaces.
This movement has been fueled by some notable musicians whose music embodied the struggles of the time while empowering Iranians to take a stand. In 2022, musician activist Shervin Hajipur released the song Baraye on Instagram as a reaction to the death of Mahsa Amini. Baraye means for in Farsi. The lyrics were sourced from public social media posts, so each line was dedicated to a specific issue and began with the word for. The most famous lyric is Baraye zan zendegi azadi, for woman, life, freedom. And the song became the unofficial anthem of the movement. Hajipur won a Grammy Award for writing the best song for social change. But he was not the only musician activist speaking out about woman, life, freedom. Toomaj Salehi is an Iranian activist and rapper who was arrested in October of 2022. Toomaj became popular in 2021 with his single Surakh Mush, or Rat Hole, which expressed the corruption of the regime. He continued to make protest music and supported the woman life freedom movement with his songs until his arrest in 2022. He was sentenced to death in 2024, and most recently this was overturned and replaced with a reduced prison sentence. Toomaj's struggle is a reminder of the horrors that artists in Iran face.
And the fact that they couldn't execute him or keep him in prison forever speaks to the power that he holds. And I think probably the regime's, sort of risk calculation that if they do execute somebody like Toomaj, which I'm sure they would like to, because he's a spokesperson and an emblem of, of this sort of freedom-seeking, democracy-seeking, movements that have been happening in Iran, the costs would be too high. At the time when he came out with his very explicit language about, this being the end of the sort of ending days of the regime and seeking the kinds of, speaking so bluntly about all kinds of corruption within the system and needing to surpass the system, nobody else had spoken those words as, explicitly and clearly, not just within Iran, but even outside of Iran. This is kind of a bit of an interesting point to sort of remark because, I think he really, within rap music, changed the discourse around in terms of positions, the kinds of positions that he advocates for Iranians to take vis-a-vis the Iranian regime.
These restrictions placed on artists by the government have led many musicians to pursue their craft outside Iran in the diaspora community. I interviewed singer-songwriter and poet Ziba Shirazi, who described her experience living through the revolution and producing groundbreaking music as a woman in the Los Angeles Persian community.
We always had secret parties at home with parents, all of us, all different ages, but I remember once we were invited to a party of young, in our generation, all we were young. And there were a bunch of fun new people that we met in some other party and they invited us. So when we went to that place, it was me, my sister, and my two brothers. When we went, there was no one there at the party, and no one opened the door. And we were like, oh, these new people, perhaps they fooled us, they didn't want us to go. And later on, we found out that Comité actually went there and took them all. But I got out of 79, 84, 85, we come out. So I was lucky that we got visa to get out of Iran. We got visa from Turkey, actually, which that is a very fun story. Me and my sister went to consulate, and my sister told them, they asked, what is the reason to go to America? We say to see Michael Jackson, because it was at the heat of Michael Jackson, and going to Disneyland. Believe it or not, the consular just laughed about it, and he gave visa to both of us. So that easy we got visa for America and we came to America. At the time, I was the first Iranian woman songwriter, singer-songwriter. Before that, it was custom that for men write the poetry, women sing it. So I started writing my own poetry and put music on it and sing it. And when I took my album to the, one of these Persian companies, like it was Taraneh at the time. I don't know if they're still around or not, but they told me, I was told that, your music is nice, but people won't like this kind of music because, at the time, every music was just making for dance. It was totally different. So I started producing my own music. And actually, I always said, در به در و خانه به خانه بردم موزیک ما. So I took it to every home, just one by one. And I remember even once a very famous Iranian poet, Mail again, he was listening to, he came to the studio, he was recording in the next studio. So he came to the studio and I was singing a song about Iran. And he looked at me and said, Ziba, I don't think you should sing about Iran and these kind of things. You should just sing about the other song that you have, that hold me, touch me, kiss me. These are good for you. And I want you really to say that although we were in America, the Persian community back then, and still some now, it's not open to women artists. In every album I made, I dedicated the first song to the situation in Iran. Whether that situation is from us, that how, as an immigrant, how we feel, women in Iran, prostitution in Iran, jail in Iran, drug abuse in Iran. So all these things, it was the first, I saw it as my duty to do this for the people that they don't have a voice. That is how I used my voice.
Ziba's dedication to recognizing Iran through her music reminded me of the struggles other musicians face when trying to preserve authenticity after they leave Iran. Many musicians have to leave home to make music free from censorship, but once leaving home, they are cut off from the inspiration or main audience for their work.
I think people outside of Iran, we have freedom of speech. We can talk about whatever we want, but the distance that we have from Iran, especially when you're an artist and you're not allowed to go back, you start to see you're looking at the same object, but you're from further away. It gives you a different perspective. You don't see as much detail, but you might see it in the context of the whole global scene. But as somebody who's in there, he sees more details. And I remember the songs that the very first album that I did, Kiosk, a lot of people came to me, and I think it was even in one of the critics' writings of the album in English that it smells like Tehran. Because it was written in Tehran. I was riding the cabs, I was in the streets when I was writing those songs. So it really had that smell. But my third and fourth album didn't smell like Tehran, but had a different perspective. But the subject was still Iran. I was still talking about Iran, my friends, my experiences, but from a different angle with a broader perspective, which I'm not sure if it's better or worse, but it's different.
Professor Siam Dost supports Arash's statements by showing how this cultural disconnect is observable not just by the artist, but by the listener as well.
For one thing, I think rappers outside of Iran, no matter how close they are still to Iran and have relations and all of that, once you leave the country, you lose that kind of, authenticity of speaking for Iranians inside Iran. And you also lose a bit of touch with how the kind of the notion of really being able to truly embody that lessons within musicians outside of Iran.
Walking down the streets of LA, I could see the Persian influence everywhere. Despite revolution, censorship, and even war, Iranian culture continues to thrive as it has for thousands of years. My thoughts took me back to some of the conversations I'd had. Conversations with professors and poets, scholars and musicians, waitresses and monarchs. Despite these vastly different perspectives, they all expressed one thing in common: that they had hope.
میتونم یک سوال از شما
بفرمایید.
بپرسم؟ به انگلیسی if that's okay.
Okay, sure.
As an Iranian who's lived outside of Iran for a very long time, and you see the recent protests happening now, what gives you hope for a better Iran that you could return to?
What gives me hope?
Yeah.
I hope that Iranians unite and take their country back from the mullahs. That is what I'm hoping for, and I think that is possible if we all unite.
This sense of hope for people suffering incredibly, which was expressed by Simin, was also echoed in the words of Professor Siam Dost.
I think that if Iranians are left to their own devices or have the freedom to create a future state, it not very likely, it most definitely will be a democratic state, and it will be secular, a state within which religion and the practice of religion is respected for those who want to practice religion, but where religion is kept out of the governmental system.
The road to equality in Iran is long, and many battles will be fought before justice is served. But Iranians are resilient and perseverant.
I would say don't take no for an answer. Follow your dream and follow your art. If you believe in yourself, go ahead and do it yourself. It's not easy. It's never going to be easy, but it is very much satisfactory.
You know, when there are problems, how do you say, of what's happening in Iran, for instance, and the way I feel sad for what's happening, or what happens in my own life, to just sit down and cry and feel sorry for myself doesn't take me anywhere. So my weapon is to be positive, to be grateful for what I have. Culture is something I am sure that will win over what has happened in Iran.
Of course.
I always want to be positive. And as I always say, that light will overcome the darkness, and Iran will rise from her ashes. And Iranians, women especially, not only men, but are very courageous. Never lose hope, although I know it's very difficult. But as I always say, light will overcome the darkness.